Thank you guys for all coming out tonight. We have a speaker, Michael St. John Turner from the New York State Higher Education Services, and he will be reviewing the ins and outs of financial aid. We do have some handouts over there, although the presentation has been uploaded to the guidance website under the resources, parent presentations. You're more than welcome to download it, or you can also send your son or daughter to us if we need to print off a copy for them. Thank you so much.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking a little extra time out of your day to learn about this important part of the college process, which is how in the heck do we pay for it? So my name is Michael St. John Turner. As you heard, I work for the state of New York. The agency I represent is Higher Ed Services Corporation, or HESC. We're in charge of all of New York's financial aid programs, so anything that the state has set aside for paying for college, saving for college, loan forgiveness, it all runs through my agency. So most folks know us by some of the programs that we give out. For example, now the Excelsior Scholarship, that's something that we provide. But we also have many other programs, which I'll be talking about, some of the highlights of those later. I'm also here to be your guide in the greater world of financial aid. So we're going to be talking about how the federal process goes, what you could potentially get from colleges. We'll talk about whether or not you qualify for need-based aid. We'll kind of cover all these different areas to make sure that you're fully informed on how to handle this process. So as you heard, the slideshow will be available to you at a later point, so you could relive the magic and wonder of this session to your heart's content. But let's get started. So of course, when we're looking for aid, we're looking for ways of helping pay for the cost of college. When we're applying for aid, there's two types of financial aid opportunities. There are those of which you get off of your income, which we call need-based aid, and then there are those that we call merit-based aid, which are tied to other qualifications, so not necessarily your finances. So with merit-based aid, most people associate it with good grades, test scores, so academics. But merit-based aid is not solely exclusive to academics. So for example, you can get scholarships or merit-based aid off of athletics. You can get it off of talent that the student has. I used to work for a college before I joined the state many years ago where we gave out scholarships to students who were on the school's marching band. So there's many different ways of getting scholarships. It's not just, acing the SAT, having the perfect grades or perfect ranking coming out of high school. So you do want to keep that in mind as you're looking at all the different programs that are out there. Now, when you're applying for aid, it's typically at the same time that students are applying for college. So, families are always wondering about the timing of things. Senior students and parents are filling out the forms for aid now, while you're also filling out your forms for college. Some students may have already filed because there may have been earlier deadlines for early action, early decision applicants. Some of you may have not yet filed because your child's applying for regular decision and you might have more time. This is a process that does reward those who can buy some time. So I always tell families, when you're applying, make sure you're aware of college deadlines because it's not necessarily something you need to rush to do right away because there may be some strategizing around your finances to put yourself in a better place to qualify. But the reason why colleges want you to apply in the fall is that the goal is to notify the family about your aid eligibility at the point when they notify you about admission. So schools will say, congratulations, you've been admitted to our school, and they'll usually send a packet home that will have the admissions letter and the financial aid letter. When you see these letters, or these financial aid notifications we call them, you want to make sure you can clearly determine is this a good offer or not. And the way to do that is by looking at the individual awards that they're giving you. So most people are looking for as much free money as possible, so you're looking, of course, for grant and scholarship aid. Grant and scholarship aid, though, may come with strings attached. You want to make sure you're aware of all the ins and outs. So for example, you want to ask important questions like, is it renewable? A college may offer a grant or scholarship as a one-year offering and may not renew it into sophomore or junior year or senior year, and you might feel like they kind of tricked you or pulled the rug out from under you if you get one of these one-shot kind of awards. If it is renewable, that's great. But what is the basis of the award? Is it based on our need? Is it based on merit? Because if it's based on need, you're going to have to fill out these financial aid forms every year in order to requalify. So for example, when you're applying for programs like the Excelsior Scholarship or Pell Grants from the federal government, those are contingent on your income, and you have to maintain similar level of income in order to keep your eligibility for these programs, and you have to refile the FAFSA forms or the CSS profile every year to requalify. If it's based on merit, you want to make sure your kids know what they need to do to maintain their scholarship. All scholarships might have academic requirements. In New York State, you'll learn that we have out-of-school requirements. We ask students to do things like maintain their New York State residency or work inside the state if they're getting a special program from New York. So those are things that you want to be fully versed of, because you don't want to lose a scholarship and you don't want anything to convert to a loan or a repayment. So those are things to be mindful of with your free money. Now, when the free money is not enough, the college will offer what we call self-help aid programs. So they're part of financial aid awards, but they're not free. So Work Study is one example of that. It's a jobs program for students. They're guaranteed part-time employment through their college, and they work and earn money where the salary is paid for by a federal grant called a Work Study grant. If you see federal Work Study in a student's award letter, you want to take it out because that money doesn't exist yet. Your child has to go to college, they have to work, they have to earn that money. So you don't want to count that award as something that's going to be paying your bill. Although, students who work and earn the money could use it to buy their books or pay for what we call the incidental expenses of college. Student loans, we're going to go and specifically look at what the federal loan options are that you may get, because most families do borrow from the federal loan programs, so we'll revisit the conversation about loans in a moment. But first I want to get to the elephant in the room, which is whether or not you're qualified. So I've been in student aid and higher ed finance now going on 18 years, and I have met many a family who are concerned, especially working parents, how is this going to shake out for us? Will we qualify or not? And most people are talking about need-based aid more so than merit-based aid. Now, there's a formula at play, and colleges use this very simple approach in determining whether a family qualifies for need-based aid at their school or not. And we call that cost of attendance minus expected family contribution equals need. So cost of attendance is what the college costs, right? So if you name a college, they have a cost associated with that school. Within, there'll be tuition, fees, housing, books, supplies, all the expenses of college. So that's a number that's quick to get. You can go to any college's website and find out what their cost of attendance is. The expected family contribution is a number that you're going to get from your financial aid forms. So when you fill out, most families fill out a form called FAFSA. That form takes your income, takes your assets, and it makes a determination as of what your ability is to pay for college. And that number we call the expected family contribution. The difference between the cost of a college and how much they think you could pay for it, if there's anything left over, that's your need-based aid eligibility. So the easiest way to show this is, here's an example. A family fills out their FAFSA form, and FAFSA is the same at every school. So you fill out FAFSA, FAFSA makes one determination, they give you one family contribution, in this case it's a $5,000 contribution. And then we can start looking at different sectors of colleges that the student's applying for. A city university, a state university, a private school. And you can see immediately the level of need depends on the cost of the college, right? So the less expensive the college, the less need you're going to have. The more expensive the college, the more need you're going to have. Now, a lot of families are concerned that if their financial ability is much stronger, you might have a higher contribution. Well, the higher your contribution, then the less you can expect. So let's say, for example, you fill out the form tonight and you're told you can pay $50,000 a year for college. That's a significant level of income and assets that you have to reach this number. Now, while at a city or state university, sure, you're not qualified. But how about these private schools? We have a lot of private schools nowadays. They're 60, 70, 80, approaching $90,000 a year. Families of greater income still do qualify for need-based aid, depending on what college their child's applied for, their children are applying for. So if you are in the mix of looking at private schools and you're applying to privates in addition to your state schools, you may have some more need-based aid eligibility at the private schools than you will at the state schools, where the state schools may be within your price range. So I always advise families of two things. The first thing is not to skip out on the process. So a lot of people are like, oh, let's not even bother to file, we're not going to get anything. If you're in this income bracket. Well, of course, if you fill out 0 financial aid forms, you will not get anything. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But if there's any level of need, even if your number is, $65,000, you still get $8,000 off the top of that example, 3 private school. You can get something from applying. But if you don't apply, you'll pay full freight and you won't qualify for anything. So you do want to try to get those savings, because even if it's $10,000 off, that's $40,000 you saved over 4 years of college. The second point to be made is that, colleges are also looking not only at the students' need-based qualifications, but they could also be looking at merit-based qualifications. And, they still will put you through the need-based process. So you should always double check with the colleges to make sure before you check out of filing the FAFSA is it still required even if we're specifically interested in getting a merit-based type of award, like a grant for good grades or a scholarship for being in a certain program? So you want to double check with the schools because it may be something you still have to do. Now, when you're looking for aid, you want to make sure you have all your bases covered, and that means applying with every available resource that's out there. There are federal dollars that you may be able to access, there's state dollars, there's money that comes directly from the institution, the college or the university the student's applying to, and there's also a lot of private money that you could leverage out there in the form of private scholarships. So we're going to kind of talk about each of these and what you need to cover to make sure that you're successfully navigating this process, starting with your federal aid. Now for federal aid, there's different programs that you may be able to get, and it's really dependent on the income of the family and your expected family contribution, right, your EFC. So from the federal government, they have a couple grant programs, the first of which is the Pell Grant, which has been around for a very long time. Federal Pell Grants nowadays, for the most qualified recipient, they get $6,195 per year. But it's prorated based on the family contribution. So the more of the FAFSA the federal government expects a family can pay for college, the less eligible you are for federal grants. So to get a maximum Pell Grant, you have to have a zero EFC, a zero family contribution from FAFSA. I usually tell families not to get lost in the weeds of whether you qualify or not. I had plenty of people over the years come up to me, ask me, they're like, oh, you know, we're a family of 4, we have a dog, we have a cat, we have 2 cars, we make this much money, do we qualify? And I'm like, well, I'm not a human financial aid calculator, so I'm not going to be able to run the formula in my head and tell you right away what your exact eligibility is. I tell you to do the form, and when you do the form, you get to the very end, and they give you a full breakdown of your eligibility. So you don't have to wait with FAFSA. As soon as you hit the submit button, you get what's called the confirmation page, which gives you your family contribution and an estimate of eligibility for things like the Pell Grant. So it's going to be very important that you read that final page of FAFSA. The SEOG grant, the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, besides being a mouthful of a name for a grant, is a program that is given at the discretion of the colleges. It's federal money, it's a federal grant, but they give each college a pool of discretionary funds that they can award in SEOG grants. So you will not know whether or not you're qualified to get an SEOG grant until you get your full financial aid offer from the college. It's typically reserved for the students who get Pell Grants. So if you're Pell eligible, you may be likely to get an SEOG depending on if the college has, money to give. SEOG grants and work-study programs are what we call first-come, first-served programs. So you want to make sure that you're applying for aid within the college's deadline. I always hear a lot of people saying, oh, I got to fill out FAFSA by October 1st. And I'm like, why? What college has an October 1st deadline? You always hear, oh, well, the earlier you apply. Well, colleges don't start looking at you until after their deadline passes. So if you file by a college's deadline, you're first come, first serve. But if you file after a college's deadline, then you're late to the party and you may not qualify for things. So you do not have to rush to do the FAFSA right away on day 1, but you just want to be mindful that colleges do have preferred filing dates, and if you want to be first in line to get their full consideration, you want to file within the filing deadlines, but not, too early or not too late. The blue programs are the loan programs. So when you file FAFSA, it serves as the initial application for federal student loans, and there's 2 federal loan programs that you'll see referred on there. The first is called the Stafford Loan Program, and the second is called the PLUS Loan Program. The Stafford Loan Program is for students. So it's a pure student loan, meaning it's borrowed by the student, it's repaid by the student, and it has nothing to do with parents. So the thing with Stafford loans is that there are 2 kinds that they can get, 2 varieties. There's a subsidized option and there's an unsubsidized option. If my child was to borrow a subsidized direct Stafford loan, it's an interest-free federal student loan that my child will borrow while they're in college, and they won't owe any interest on that loan until after they graduate. So it's an interest-free loan while my kid is in school. So it's a great financing option for families because it's a loan you borrow, you don't have to make payments until after you graduate college, and there's no interest on it until after you graduate college. So it's a really good federal loan option to take out if it's offered by the college. The unsubsidized option is the opposite. Students borrow the money, they don't have to make payments until after they graduate, but they will assess the interest on the balance while the student is in school. So, you borrow at the principal amount, but over the years and months of college, it's going to increase the balance by the unpaid interest. So I do recommend that if a family uses the unsubsidized loan, that you keep in mind the interest accruals. They'll remind the family, the student, every 3 months. They'll remind them about what the quarterly interest accruals are, and you can choose to pay it, $10, $12, $15 every 3 months. It might be helpful to do that to keep the loan balance at a minimum. Any unpaid interest will be capitalized, meaning that when the student graduates, they take all the unpaid interest, they add it back to the original principal of the loan, and then they charge you interest on that. So you end up paying interest on interest. So it's a very good idea to save money to make sure that you're doing debt service on an unsubsidized loan. Yeah?
How do they decide whether they're going to offer you an unsubsidized or a subsidized loan?
It goes back to this chart here about need. So to qualify for a subsidized loan, you have to have what we call unmet need, which means that when you fill out your FAFSA and they determine the family contribution, do you have a bottom line number there? Is it 0 that you don't have any need at the school, in which case you would only get an unsubsidized loan? Or is it like the third school where there's a $23,000 need? To meet the need, they may give you some subsidized loans to help meet the need. Now some schools meet your need not by giving you loans. Some schools make a 0 loan guarantee where they'll meet your need in free money, which is a better approach. They'll give you grants and scholarships to get you to that 23 instead of giving you subsidized loans. So those are better schools to look at, but some schools you'll see will say, oh, we met your need, and they give you some subsidized loans in addition to other programs, which is not typically what you want, but it is technically meeting your need by giving you some subsidized loan options. Okay. So that's a good question. Now, PLUS is a loan for parents. So if you see anything in a financial aid offer that says PLUS loan or PLUS loan estimate, they're saying that this is a loan that the parent could borrow to help pay the student's college costs. So PLUS stands for Parent Loan for Undergraduate Student. So the mom or the dad of the student is the borrower. Unlike the student, they require the parent to pass a credit screening. So the student, they don't check the student's credit because they already know the answer to that question. They don't have credit, they don't have a credit history. So students are automatically guaranteed their Stafford loans. But parents, you have to pass an adverse credit screening. They just basically look to see, do you have a negative credit history? Like, do you have, home foreclosure? Do you have liens against you? Accounts in collection? As long as it's not a debt-to-income screening, so as long as your credit history is clean, even though you may owe a lot of money, but you're up to date with your payments, you can borrow a PLUS loan. The amount of Stafford loans they let a student borrow are capped every year based on what year they are in college. A first-year college freshman can borrow $5,500 maximum in Stafford loans. Parents can borrow whatever they need to pay the rest of the college once the student's aid and loans have been deducted from the balance. So if the college costs $50,000 and they're giving the student $30,000 in Stafford loans and grants and scholarships, the parent can take out a PLUS loan for the remaining $20,000. So why am I going through this whole long explanation? Because sometimes you'll see award offers from colleges where it looks like they covered you in full. They give you a total, like your total aid is $70,000, but the majority of that aid is coming from a $40,000 parent loan estimate where they're expecting you to borrow the bulk of the cost and they're only covering a part of it. So you want to be able to clearly identify, all right, is this a good offer or not? If you see a big parent loan estimate, that's a big investment because that's something that you as parents are going to be taking out. For parent loans, they expect you to pay it back as you borrow, so pay it while your child is in school. You could ask for an in-school deferment just like your child gets on their student loans, but it's not a terribly good idea. Parent loan interest rate ranges from about 7 to 8% every year, and if you defer $40,000 with an 8% interest rate for about 5 years, you're going to owe quite a bit of unpaid interest, which also will capitalize. It'll add back to the balance, and you're going to owe a lot of money. You're going to have a new higher principal. You have what we call a higher total cost of the loan. So I always tell parents, make sure if you are going to use the parent loan, explore all your options. Do you have to borrow the full amount? Could you maybe finance some of it out of pocket with a monthly payment plan? Could you look at other loan options that may have more favorable terms and conditions or a lower interest rate? You really have to make sure that you do your homework before saying, okay, we're going to take out this parent loan. Although parent loans may be a good option for some of you, it's just something that's an option, it's on the table. Just because the college includes these loans in the financial aid offer doesn't mean that you're required to take them out. You can accept or you can decline them. We spoke about the work-study program earlier. There's actually a question on your FAFSA form that asks if your student wants to participate. So it comes up early on in the FAFSA. Does the student want to be in work study? Yes, no, I don't know. So you'd want to make sure that you weigh the pros and cons of the child having a job. I do recommend it for a lot of families because it also builds work experience. It gives students a chance to test out some different occupations. The college I used to work at, for example, we had a big pre-med program, had all these kids, oh, I'm going to be doctors and nurses and this. So we put them working as work study students in the school teaching hospital, university teaching hospital, and we had about a 50% dropout rate. They would see a patient come in, blood, vomit, feces, and they were like, nope, I don't want to be a doctor anymore. I want to be, oh, you have a photography program, I think I'm going to do that. So it gives them a chance to kind of explore. We try to give them jobs that are related to what they're studying. FAFSA is your application for all things federal aid, but it's not only important to do FAFSA to get your federal money, colleges are also looking at the FAFSA to qualify you for their programs. Also, the state of New York is going to be looking at FAFSA to qualify you for any of our need-based programs. So FAFSA is going to be really important for you to make sure that you get done. It's usually done during the fall of senior year. It opens up October 1st, so if you're a senior parent, this is something that maybe some of you have already done or you're looking to do in the near future. As I said earlier, you want to just be mindful that colleges do have filing deadlines, so you want to be mindful of getting that FAFSA in ahead of the school's filing deadline. If you're a junior parent, then you're not doing FAFSA until next fall when your child is a senior. But it's always good to find out what goes in FAFSA, so we'll talk a little bit about that. FAFSA is done online, FAFSA, FAFSA.gov. There's an app that you could download for your phone called My Student Aid, where you're also able to do FAFSA on your phone or your tablet if you like doing things on mobile devices. Now, when you're applying for FAFSA, they're going to ask you to register for these usernames and passwords called Federal Student Aid or FSA IDs. These are basically the usernames and passwords that are needed to complete the FAFSA form. They require the student who's going to college to make one of these, and they require one of the student's parents to also create an FSA ID. The reason why is that FAFSA has questions for students and it has questions for parents, and they require both of you to participate on the form, and they require both of you to sign off on the application. And your FSA ID serves as not only your login, but your legal signature, because it's tied to your identity. So this is something that you do when you start the FAFSA. You want to make sure you keep a hold of that login because you're going to need it for every year that your child is renewing their financial aid. You'll also need it for future children who are going to go to college. So if you have a child who's 2 years behind your senior, when they're ready to go to college, you'll use the same parent FSA ID that you did for your older child. You're going to use that to help file your younger child's FAFSA. So it's something that you carry along with you. And if the parent goes to college, you would also use the same ID for the parent now as a student, so it's tied to your identity. Now, when you're in FAFSA, a lot of the FAFSA is very, very easy, very straightforward to answer, but we don't want you to take that for granted because part of my job with the state is I troubleshoot a lot of problems and complaints that folks have, and one of my frustrations with my job being in client customer service issues is about 90% of the problems I see were created by the people who are complaining. So it's really your fault. You don't like to hear that, and I won't say that to your face. I'll say that after we get off the phone. Like for example, the FAFSA says, are you married, right? And the first person who answers the FAFSA questions is students, but I have parents that do this for their kid. So the question will come up, as of today, what is your marital status? And you will literally marry your child to your spouse. I have kids married to their fathers, kids married to their mothers. It's really not only just funny, it's gross. Because parents are filling this out. It's like, oh, I'm married. Yeah, I'm married, and here's my husband's info. And it's saying, is the student married? Because you're in the student section, not the parent section. And then, of course, we'll get a complaint that there's an issue with your kid's FAFSA. Why aren't they getting their money? And I'm like, sir, ma'am, you married your kid to your spouse. But you don't want to hear that. So all I tell you is be careful when you're doing the form. Make sure you answer the questions and you know where you are in the form. Because, for example, FAFSA will ask about student income and student assets, separately from when they ask about parent income and parent assets. And one common mistake we see is that parents will double report the family income as both parent income and student income when they ask questions, for example, about tax status and certain numbers on the taxes. I've literally seen a family say, oh yeah, parents file taxes, married, filing jointly, we make $100,000. And then we'll say, did the student file taxes? And you'll say, yeah, they did married, file jointly, and they made $100,000. and it looks like you make $200,000 as a family, so it blows up your eligibility. So we want to make sure that you're treading very carefully. So these are typical questions that students will answer, very basic questions: their name, high school, what colleges are they applying to. When they're applying for financial aid, we know that they're not admitted yet, so they're allowed to enter multiple names of colleges. The maximum number of colleges that can be listed on FAFSA in one submission are 10 schools. If you're applying to more than 10 colleges, the FAFSA is going to tell you that once you've submitted it, you're allowed to return when it's processed and edit the names of those schools to resubmit it for additional colleges. FAFSA works on a transactional basis, meaning that when you submit it tonight for 10 colleges, within 4 days, those 10 colleges get transaction 1 of your FAFSA, your November 19th submission. On November 24th, or whatever day you go back in, you could resubmit it, delete the 10 schools that got the November 19th version, and then put 10 new schools who will get the November 24th version in about 3-4 days. You're not changing anything else on the FAFSA. You're not going to change your name or your income. You're just resubmitting the same form with a new batch of college names, and you're going to repeat that process as often as necessary to make sure that you've submitted the form at least once with every name of the colleges that your children, the students, are applying to. Now, there's also some questions about the students' eligibility as it relates to what we call independent status, and this is also sometimes where we see some mistakes being made. They're going to ask students questions, for example, like, are you married, do you have kids? Please don't make your kid have your kids. I've seen that happen. Yeah, my kid has kids, their brothers and sisters are now their children. When you're answering these questions, they're trying to check, for example, does a student have a qualifying situation that makes them an independent student? Because the rule of thumb is that you're not independent for financial aid until you're 24 years old. So if they see by a student's date of birth that they're younger than 24, they're going to automatically expect that they're applying with parents. However, before they ask parent questions, they're going to ask the student a bunch of these qualifying situations is to see, are they independent. So for example, if a student is 21 and they're married and they have their own family, they could file independently. If a student is in their 20s and they're in the military, they serve on active duty, or they're a veteran of the armed forces, they could apply independently. So there are all of these allowances that are made. A student who's an orphan, a student who's been in the foster care system. If none of these situations apply, you're going to do no, no, none of the above, and then the FAFSA will transition you to questions for parents. So they'll say, okay, the student's not an independent student, they're required to file with their parents, and parents are going to be answering questions about their names, their demographic information, family size, how many kids go to college, your income, your assets. Everything's tied to the most recent taxes, which is 2018 for the senior parents. If you're a junior parent, then it's going to be the 2019 tax returns, which you're going to file early in the new year. Those will be the ones that will factor into your child's senior year FAFSA. So it's whatever tax return you have is the most recent. Now, for parent information, a lot of the questions for parents are very, very straightforward. Areas where we usually get questions have to do with marital status. So, how do we approach this if we're a single parent? How do we do it if we're a two-parent, remarried family? If you're a single parent, they only want the information from the parent that has what we call residential custody over the student. So the FAFSA in the instructions says which parent does the student live with, mother or father. And that's the parent that the student will be reporting solely on the form. So if the student's parents, let's say, got divorced many years ago, the student lives primarily with mom, you would say a divorced parent, mom is the custodial parent, and mom would be the only one required to answer questions. They don't want to know about dad or dad's income. Unless mom and dad still live together. If you have a two-parent household, then they're going to ask for both parents to report their info, no matter if you're married or not, file your taxes together or not, love each other, hate each other, talk to each other. I have seen all sorts of situations, parents are like, oh, we're divorced, but we still live together because New York is so expensive. So we can't stand each other, but I live upstairs and dad lives in the basement. Well, then they have a status called unmarried parents who live together, and that's what you would put, and you would report both parents' finances. If you are remarried, they're going to ask for spousal income, because spousal income is considered family income, and we would be looking at any step-parents' information the same as we would a biological parent in the case of a two-parent household. Some parents will say to me, oh, with the custodial parenting, what if parents share custody? I always joke, you should call the FAFSA people and say, look, we can't figure out where our kid lives most of the time, so we share custody. What should we do? The FAFSA people will say to you, who makes more money, mom or dad? Give us that person. And then most people are like, I kind of like the other option where I get to say where the kids live. So it's either you decide where your kids live most of the year, or who makes more money, and that's who you use on FAFSA. Now, obviously, colleges look for inconsistencies because if you say, oh yeah, the kid lives with their dad, and we look at dad's address and he lives in Buffalo, that's a very long drive to school most of the time that your kid has to take from their dad's house in Buffalo to get to this high school. So of course things have to be done within reason. So, usually we do look to see are the parents in the school district, stuff like that, to see if there's any conflict. We also get questioned about changes. What if your finances have changed? You report your 2018 taxes and you feel like, okay, I lost my job recently, this is not fair, they're going to be basing our eligibility off of money I made last year, not what's going on right now. The FAFSA is black and white. You have to report what it's asking you to report. So it asks you for 2018, you have to put 2018. However, they grant broad authority to colleges to override the FAFSA in cases of special circumstances. So they allow parents to contact the financial aid office at a college and say, hey look, I lost my job this year, but I just filed FAFSA, I gave you my old numbers, that was my old salary. The college will say, okay, give us some documentation that you lost your job, and also show us what are you making now. Are you collecting unemployment? Did you get a different job? Are you making less salary? And they can actually go into the FAFSA and they can override your 2018 numbers. Job loss is one example. It could be divorce or separation. Parents filed married last year. They've been separated though for most of this year. Now and they're filing for divorce. How do we do that? Well, colleges can break apart the taxes. They can take the custodial parent's income away from the non-custodial parent. What if we had a one-time income distribution in 2018? Meaning maybe we exercised some stock options, or we took some money out of retirement, or we came into some inheritance. Things that might show up in your taxes that makes your total overall income look higher than what it usually is year to year. Once again, colleges have broad authority to remove those blips in your income and give you a fair assessment in the process, but you have to pursue it with them. You have to contact the colleges and say, hey, we have this, that, and the other thing going on, and they'll usually ask you for a statement and supporting documentation, and they'll help you at any point. Maybe you're going to retire from work when your kid is about to start college. That might be the change. It might not have happened now, it might happen in the near future. At any point you experience a financial change, even if your kid's in the middle of college this fall, contact the financial aid office. They can do a mid-year adjustment for you. So it's not something that you have to wait till the next year to show. Assets also tend to come up as an issue of contention for families. The first thing is people don't like to report their assets. So, they're asking questions about bank account balances, and investments, and real estate. But the other issue is there's oftentimes mistakes made here because they don't want all of your assets. Some of your assets are protected while other things are not. So for example, when they ask about investments, in the instructions they say do not report the family home as real estate investment, and do not report retirement assets such as 401ks, IRAs, pensions. Neither do you report life insurance or annuities. So some things are protected by FAFSA. You don't have to report them. But of course, we'll get the occasional family who will put their retirement asset on here by accident. What they generally want are account balances. So what do you have in your bank accounts right now? We're talking cash savings, checking account balances. Those are pretty straightforward, and they're present day values. So if I was filling out FAFSA right now for my kid, it would say, what do I have in the bank right now? I'll log into my banking app. This is what I have. I give the numbers. Here's a tip, never file FAFSA the day you got paid, because maybe you want to pay some bills first. This is why I always tell families it's not a good idea to rush to do FAFSA, because you may want to strategize a little bit. Like I have families saying, oh, well, we have some extra money in savings because, we're planning on buying a new car. I say, buy the new car, file FAFSA after. Oh, we're going to remodel our kitchen. Remodel kitchen, file FAFSA. So you're allowed to spend your money, but the day you file, you have to account for what's in the bank. So if you filed 2 weeks ago and you reported what you have 2 weeks ago, that's done. Even if you're going to buy a house tomorrow, that money's already reported and colleges are required to assess it. So buy the house, file FAFSA. So you want to make sure that you do take those steps to make sure that you're ready to report your assets when you're filing the FAFSA. So that's account balances. They're going to ask this of both the student and the parent. So for parents, pretty straightforward. For students, we're talking about custodial accounts. So did you open up like a junior savings or checking account? We call these UGMA, UTMA types of arrangements where a parent is a custodian and you hold the asset while the child is a minor, but then when they're of age, it's their asset. So we report that as the student's money. We report that junior savings account as our college-bound students' money. Investments, we're talking about mutual funds, money market accounts, stocks, bonds, things that are not in retirement plans. It could include 529 college savings plans. So if you have 529 saved for all the kids, they want those balances as part of your investments. Why? Because they're college savings, so it's something that they're looking at. How much money have you saved for college? It could also include trust funds that the student may have. Trust funds are always the contention for families because they're like, oh, but we have restrictions. Most restrictions on trusts are what we call voluntary restrictions. So you set it up where, oh, I can't touch the money till I'm 38 years old. Doesn't matter if you can't touch the money until you're 50 years old. The colleges are still going to want you to calculate what the current value of the trust is if you were to have access to the funds today and include that as an asset, whether it belongs to the parent, whether it belongs to the student. Even if the student or parent didn't open it up, let's say grandma started a trust for her grandchild, that would be reported on the FAFSA as an asset that will eventually belong to the student. Colleges know you can't touch that money because of your voluntary restrictions, but you can borrow against it. So they're definitely looking at that as a resource that families have in terms of being able to finance college. So another common mistake, we see families not put their trust funds, and things will come up because they could see things on taxes where you might own a trust, but they didn't see it here. Real estate would be real estate that you own outside of your family home. So do you have like a second property? Maybe you have a rental property you have. Maybe you have a vacation home. You would have to value that as part of your investment net worth. So they say investment / real estate. So if I were to sell my additional property, how much would I get for it on the current market? You could subtract debt from that sale price. There are all sorts of opinions about how you should value property. If you go onto college blogs, people say, oh, use the Federal Housing Index. Federal Housing Index is way off base. They think like your home is worth like $10,000. Use Zillow or like local realtors, because when colleges assess the value of your property, we're looking at comps. We go right to Zillow, we look at your neighborhood, we look at your home, square footage, all of that, and then we say, okay, what are similar homes in the area going for? And that's what we think market value for homes are yet.
If you have an investment that you're not the sole owner of, you are a part owner with another family member that is not the other parent.
So you're only responsible for reporting your share of ownership. So let's say it's not let's say it's a property. You have, like, maybe you inherited your parents' home and they left it to you and your brother. When you're reporting it on FAFSA as a property, you only own 50% of it. So you're only representing your share of ownership in that property. Yeah. So same thing for an investment. Now, business values, there's a protection on here for majority family-owned businesses that have 100 or less full-time equivalent employees, or FTEs. So if you own a business and it's a majority family-owned business, whether you own a whole thing or you, your brother, your dad own it, if it's a majority family-owned business, it's excluded depending on the number of people that work for that business. So if it's a small business, there's 20 people that work for it, family-owned business, you put 0 for business values. You don't have to account for it. Now they'll look at what your income comes in from that business. That'll be on your personal income taxes. That'll be in your tax questions, but you don't have to account for that. If you're a minority owner in a business that's not owned by your family, so let's say you're an investor, you own 20% of a small business, you do have to report your share of ownership, what it would be worth if you were to sell your stake in that business, if it's not, the other owners in that business are not family members, no matter how big or small the business is, how many employees it has. So be careful there, because it's, once again, another thing. Colleges are always keying in on your taxes to see what kinds of things do you hold, what kind of interest do you get, what kind of dividends do you get, what kind of schedules do you file. So we can see things like rental income, which comes on Schedule E. We can see things like self-employment income, which comes on Schedule C. We can see LLPs and LLCs and subchapter S corporations. All these things are in your tax paperwork. So you want to make sure that when you're reporting it, you're doing your due diligence to say, this is what I have, you're showing what you have, you give the numbers that you think best represent it. Colleges will look at it, and in the end, if they think you did a fair assessment, they'll leave you alone. But they do reserve the right to ask questions. They could ask you to send in your tax returns. They could ask you to send in, paperwork regarding your business or properties. So just be mindful of that. We call this process verification. Some people just get selected for verification because a financial aid professional like myself is just looking at your FAFSA, looking at your taxes, and I'm kind of saying, okay, there's some conflicting information here. I want to get some clarification. And we'll usually contact the family and ask you for information to help clear the air. So your goal is to get through FAFSA successfully and get what we call the confirmation page. You submit it, you did your best to answer the questions, and at the end it says, congratulations, your FAFSA has been successfully submitted. About 8 out of 10 people see that first line and they're like, great, it's done. They close the window and they go on with the rest of their life. It's very important that you read this final page because there's two things you want to key in on. The first is a breakdown of your eligibility. They have these little boxes that you could click on, these gray boxes that explain like what you're qualified for, what your EFC, your family contribution is. And then the second thing you want to really look out for are these links. There's a link to transfer to New York State to file for your New York State financial aid. And there's another link if you have more than one child that needs to file FAFSA. There's a copy button where you can copy one kid's FAFSA to the next. That way you're not filling out FAFSAs all night if you have 3 kids going to college next year. These links are not retrievable if you close the window. So if you close the window, you got to do a new FAFSA for your next kid, or you have to apply for New York State aid about 1 week after filing the FAFSA, and I'll explain that right now. So when you complete the federal process, we're going to check on FAFSA. Are you a New York resident and are you applying to go to any colleges in New York? And then we have a relationship, we have a partnership with FAFSA where we allow them to transfer your FAFSA immediately over to New York State using this link and allowing you to apply for New York State financial aid. New York State offers several different types of financial aid programs, and what's great about New York is that we're both a need-based and merit-based state. So why do I say that? Because usually most states are either one or the other. You qualify off of your income or you qualify off of your kid's achievement. New York actually offers both types of opportunities. So some families may qualify for things like the Excelsior Scholarship, which is free tuition to SUNY and CUNY by way of making less than $125,000 a year, which is the qualification for that. We have a handout on the table. Or maybe your child did really, really well in high school and they want to get free tuition to go to SUNY, but not because of their parents' income, because they may qualify for what we call the STEM Incentive Scholarship, which gives students free state tuition to go to any public college in New York where they want to study science, tech, engineering, math-related types of majors. But it's achievement-based, meaning to qualify, it's not based on what parents made from their income, it's based on how well students did in high school. So we have different kind of indicators, and we have several different types of these scholarships, and they're all based on what they want to study. So we have one in teaching, one in social work, and they look at things like high school ranking, grade average. The STEM incentive, that's available now, and what's great about some of our programs like STEM is they're transferable to private schools. So let's say your child didn't want to go to a SUNY, they want to go to NYU. You could take your STEM scholarship with you to NYU and get the same amount of money that you would have gotten to go to SUNY Albany, applicable to NYU. So you're not limited to go to a state school. We do the same thing with the Excelsior Scholarship, except we have a whole different program. So Excelsior is free tuition at SUNY or CUNY. The Enhanced Tuition Award is a version of Excelsior where you can get a similar amount of funding that you would have gotten to go to a state school, but it's applicable to private schools. So you would just apply, if I wanted to go to St. John's University in Queens, I would just basically apply for the Enhanced Tuition Award instead of the Excelsior Scholarship. But if I wanted to go to New Paltz, I could apply for Excelsior. But if I'm looking to go get the STEM Scholarship, I can get that at St. John's or I can get it at New Paltz because that's a flexible scholarship. TAP is our main grant program, and I'll get your question in a moment. But the grant program is also flexible to public and private colleges. TAP is one of the first things we're going to have families try to get. It's based on your New York State net taxable income, so it's line 37 of your state taxes. And if that number is equal to or less than $80,000, you would qualify for tuition assistance. The grant ranges from $500 to $5,165. Depends on how close your line 37 is to the maximum number. And that's free money that you would get to help with tuition at any public or private college. It's the initial thing we have you apply for. Go ahead.
Private colleges in New York State.
All New York programs, grant scholarships, have to be used at a school within New York. So there's this rumor sometimes, because we're close to Connecticut, right? Where, if you go to Connecticut school, you can take New York financial aid. That's an urban myth. Some Connecticut colleges may give you Connecticut in-state tuition because they're trying to recruit you over the border, but you cannot take your New York Excelsior and use that at Quinnipiac. So you can't use it, it has to be at a New York college, yeah. Yep, so each of these has their own application, right? STEM is a merit-based program for students wanting to study in science, tech, engineering, and math-related, yes.
So students have to declare what they can study
So they're required to declare when the college requires them to declare, but they have to have the intention during their first 2 years. Usually the first 2 years of college you can be undecided. The intention is that when they're required to declare, most schools require it at the end of sophomore year, that they're going to declare in one of the 100 plus STEM eligible majors that we list on the website. Now if your child says, oh yeah, I'm so psyched, I want to do forensic science at John Jay down in Manhattan, and then all of a sudden they take that program and they're not doing well, they don't like it, and they say, nah, I want to change that to public affairs. Public affairs is not a STEM major. If they got it for their first 2 years, they'll have to pay us back for taking the scholarship and then not declaring the right major. So they can be penalized right away in school if they don't declare a STEM-related major. They can change their mind within STEM. So if they say, oh, I wanted to go, for chemistry and now I want to do mathematics, that's completely fine. So they have to make sure that they're on board with one of the STEM-eligible majors when they decide. The second part of it is that there's an after-college requirement to live and to work in a STEM-related field, both in New York State. So the student also has to be committed that in the years after college, for up to 5 years, that they're going to be working in New York and living in New York in a STEM-eligible career. So for example, we just had a student that changed from medical research, he was working at Pfizer, and then he got a job at Everyday Health writing articles about pharmacy. We're making him pay back his scholarship. Even though he's writing about medicine, journalism is not an eligible major. So yeah, go ahead with your follow-up. Yep.
So the student decides after the first year, or later on in the year,
So students have to apply for this scholarship at graduation by the time they complete high school before they start college. So the deadline, this is open now, opened up October 1st. The deadline to apply is we give students up to August 15th. So they have a long time to decide what they're going to do. So even if they get accepted to a state school or a private school and they don't know their major, they have until August 15th to back out. So if they applied for it now, we approve them, and then they say all of a sudden in the summer, I don't think I'm going to do this STEM thing, they should back out before we pay it. Once we pay it, they're obligated. They sign a contract with the state, which explains the obligation, so it is kind of ironclad. Same thing with the Excelsior Scholarship. Excelsior requires live in New York for every year that you get Excelsior, you have to live in New York after college. So students make the agreement, oh, I take the free tuition through Excelsior, I'm going to live in New York State for the same amount of time that I got the scholarship for. That's year-for-year exchange. STEM is 5 years. If they get STEM for 2 years, they have to do 5 years of living in New York. So they have to be mindful of that requirement. So yeah, you definitely want to look at applying. So there's two types of ways of applying for financial aid in New York nowadays. There's the FAFSA route, and there's what we call the DREAM Act route. For FAFSA eligible students, I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to show you again, there's a tie-in that we have on FAFSA where you could initiate the application to apply for state aid, and you can get in our system. For students who do not qualify for FAFSA due to a citizenship or immigration status disqualification, so FAFSA has all these very strict rules about students have to be this, they have to have a green card, they have to be a citizen. New York State does allow a select group of students who qualify under provisions of what we call the New York State DREAM Act legislation to potentially qualify for state aid, but instead of through FAFSA, they can apply through what we call the DREAM Act application. So here's how it works. If I do FAFSA, I'm doing FAFSA with my kid right now, my kid's qualified to get federal aid, they meet all the qualifications for FAFSA, I'm on the final page of FAFSA, it says congratulations at the top. Alright, that's loading. So if they file a FAFSA, let's go back there. Alright, so we file FAFSA, we get the confirmation page, just congratulations at the top. In the center of the page, you have to scroll down sometimes depending on how zoomed in your browser is. There's two rectangles, and one on the left says start your state application for New York State aid, and the one on the right says does your brother or sister also need to file FAFSA. I can't tell you the countless numbers of families that miss this just because you read the top of it and you think you're finished. If you have this page on, you can click the New York State link, and then a pop-up window comes up which allows you to do what we call the New York State Student Aid Payment Application. It's a general application that allows you to register for our website, shows us your income, and it gets you on file with us, so then you can apply for, the initial thing is the TAP grant, and then it also has, you have a sign-in that you could apply for any of our other programs, like STEM, like Excelsior, but you just want to keep in mind that certain programs may not be available at the moment. So for example, if I did my kids' FAFSA, we do this New York application, after I file that, I could immediately file for STEM because that's out right now. Excelsior doesn't come out until spring. So if you went to then go click on to apply for Excelsior, you would see a note there that says it's not available until spring, and there would be an email sign up where we could put our email so we can get an email when it does come out. And then when it comes out in the spring, I'll have my login, because I've already done this, and they'll have my information on file, and then I can complete the application for Excelsior. So you do want to file this initial application just to get on the books with us. Even if you think your income's not going to be qualified for any of our programs that are income restricted, it does get your kids' information in our system, it does get your info in there, that way it makes it easier to apply for our other programs and renewing our programs year to year. Yeah?
Sorry, but I was one of those, I clicked on that.
Yep.
That's a threat, congratulations. I clicked on it, it said your information will be transferred,
Yep.
and it just had his name and everything else was blank. So I exited out, I said, oh, I know I'm gonna come to this meeting, but
Yep.
unfortunately more than a week has passed.
Yep.
So how do I get back in?
Sure. So what happens is that initial page, I know the page that you're talking about, it looks like some of it is incomplete. You're just going to go next there. Because what it is that when you transferred it, it transferred over some of his info from FAFSA and it pre-populated the page, but it didn't take everything, like his address and stuff like that.
There's no way to put it in.
Yeah, I mean,
Exit it out.
you could just, like the instructions say, like just to go next if everything is correct, and that you'll have an opportunity later to update. So what you do is, all right, if you miss this page, if it's been more than 1 week removed since when you file FAFSA and you have your email from FAFSA that your FAFSA was processed and there was no problems and that's clean, then what you could do is you could just go online to the HESC website, which I'll give you again in a moment, and you could just put in, we call it just put apply for TAP. Go to the search bar, put apply for TAP, because there's a couple clicks you have to do if I were to give you the clicks. When you put apply for TAP, it gives you the page, and then there's a notice, it'll show you this image like, oh, did you get this? And then underneath it'll say, oh, did you get if you missed the link or if you missed this page, it'll say click here to apply now. And then you can just click here where it says click here, and then it'll bring you back here.
One last question.
Yep.
I apologize, but I did not see a breakdown as to what I was eligible for, because like I said, I clicked on this and I went to that. and
Yep.
pasted it out.
So you could log back into FAFSA if it's been a few days since filing, and then you can get what's called a student aid report. So when they send you the second email, it says, congratulations, your FAFSA processed successfully, you may view your student aid report. The student aid report is your full breakdown of FAFSA in a report that you could download as a PDF by logging into the FAFSA website. So just go back to FAFSA.gov, log in, and then you'll see it'll say processed successfully. There's a link that'll say view student aid report. And that's how you can review your FAFSA again to see what the outcome was. No problem. If you're not qualified, yes, there's another question, or?
How do you see what your TAP award is?
So when you submit TAP, we process it separately. It's not an instant approval, and then we email the student when it's processed successfully. If you've applied, New York has a little delay right now processing applications, so we expect to resume any day now due to some upgrades we're doing internally. So I've been telling folks, just wait, we'll send your child an email when their application has been processed, and then we'll give them a link in the email to check the status, see the result.
Thank you.
So if a student's not qualified for FAFSA, they can bypass that whole links and doing FAFSA and just go right to the New York State DREAM Act application, hesc.ny.gov/dream, and they can hit the apply now. We have a specialized application to review students' eligibility under the Jose Peralta DREAM Act. So we just want to make sure that students are aware of this depending on their citizenship and immigration status. If you're not qualified for FAFSA, you can still potentially qualify for state aid under our new DREAM Act program. So hesc.ny.gov is everything New York State financial aid. In the top corner, there's like a yellow button. It says either account access or student access. So if you're on our website, you're on our homepage, and you want to check on things, you want to see what the status is, you want to change the name of a college that you put on the form, you could click on that yellow button in the top right corner, and then you can see all of the different options of making changes or checking awards. So that's where you do all your self-service if you have to follow up with us. But I also encourage you to look at our full list of grant and scholarship programs. We have over 20 different grant, scholarship, and incentive programs, depending on what students want to study and if they meet the requirements. Like I said, some are limited to income, but we have many that are also merit-based. Now, shifting gears from federal and state money, so what the government provides, let's talk now about what colleges could potentially do for you and what we call institutional aid. It really depends on the college as to if they have a program that's tailored for your needs as a family. So what do I mean by that? So I mean families like, oh, our income is very strong and we're not going to qualify. And then I'm like, okay, what colleges are you applying to? And I hear, okay, state schools. And I'm like, all right, so yeah, you're not going to get anything because state schools, they really don't do merit-based aid. Like they have a little bit of institutional money, but like if you're looking for a scholarship for full cost, very rare at a state school. Some state schools have honors programs where you may be able to get something like that. But the vast majority of families who go to state schools get federal and state grants, and if you don't qualify for things like the Excelsior or STEM scholarships, you're pretty much not getting much at the state school. Private school is a whole different ball of wax. They have more endowment money, they give more financial aid, they're actively trying to fill their seats and making sure that they can try to steal families from state schools. So what do? They make sure that they can offer aid as a discount to make sure that they can either price match or do better than what state schools do to attract you to their schools. So that being said, you never want to have a single mindset, like, oh, we're only doing state schools, because you'll never know if you could have found a private school that would have given you a better price by way of giving you their money. But if you are looking at private schools, make sure they have a program that fits you, because if you're a family of good means and you're worried that your income is too high for this, too high for that, and then I'm like, okay, where's your kid applying? And then you start rattling off Ivy League colleges to me. Oh, our child wants to go to Columbia, Cornell, Harvard. Those are all need-based schools. Need-based colleges don't really help families of better means. They're helping students of lower means. So you may not get much from an Ivy League school. You may be expected to pay more at that school as opposed to a college that offers more merit-based aid. So you want to make sure that you're looking at colleges and you're familiar with what types of grants and scholarships do they give? Are they more tailored to our income, or is it more tailored toward achievement? And if you have a high-achieving student, you may do well at the merit-based schools as opposed to the need-based schools. Now, it may also mean not going to what I call the bumper sticker schools. When you're choosing colleges, there's this effect that we call clustering. So what happens is I speak at a lot of the schools across the state. Down in the city, I speak at some of the top high schools in the city, and we have what's called clustering. All the kids apply for the same colleges. So Stuyvesant in Manhattan, a lot of their kids apply to Albany, Binghamton, Buffalo, and Stony Brook, all the university centers. And those schools get, 500, 600 seniors from this high school. There's one high school, and they get the cream of the crop. They're like, we get to pick who we want. And not only that, there's so much competition, we don't have to give them money, because basically they all want to come here, and there's no competition over the student, because everybody's clustered here at the same school. We get to choose, and we don't get to fund them, and they'll still come here because it's highly desirable. What you want to do is you want to try to find that odd college that not too many kids from your high school are applying to. Maybe not the bumper sticker school, which I call, everybody's glad to go, oh, my kid's going to NYU. And maybe a small liberal arts college in Vermont, or a small liberal arts college somewhere in Pennsylvania, where they'll give your kid a full tuition merit-based scholarship to come there, and it'll only cost you because cost of living is low, it'll cost you $10,000 for the housing. Whereas if you sent them to, Albany, you would pay $26,000 out of pocket, no questions asked. So you want to make sure that you're kind of looking and you're comparing and you're really kind of thinking a little outside of the box with the colleges, because that's where you can find the savings. But clustering is still a thing that a lot of folks, you ask all the senior students, where are you applying to? And you hear the same schools. And a lot of families are disenchanted by the financial aid process, and it's because they get the pick of the litter with you guys if you're all applying to the same schools. Now, it's all about research. So what you need to do is you need to look out for this one thing we call profile. Some private schools that are need-based will do an additional screening of family finances because they believe that FAFSA is too easy on you. So for example, if you're a self-employed family, you basically write your own checks to pay yourself from your business, you might make $17,000 a year. Even though your business gross receipts are $10 million a year, and you drive a nice car, you have a nice house, and and we look at your taxes, you're like, how are you doing this off of a $17,000 income? we know you're not really making $17,000. Your accountant is making it look like you make $17,000. So there comes Profile. Profile will ask for your business taxes, your K-1s, they'll look at all your business holdings, and in the end they might decide, sure, yeah, you look low income on FAFSA and on taxes, but in real life you do make a lot more money. So we, the college, are not going to give you anything. We, the college, are going to expect you to pay more. So the schools that require this are typically your highly desirable bumper sticker colleges that most people flock to, your NYUs. In New York, NYU, Syracuse, Fordham, Cornell, Columbia, Vassar, University of Rochester, Ithaca, a lot of the popular private schools in New York. Out of state, name a popular private school, bumper sticker college. Out of state, BU, BC, Harvard, Notre Dame, you name a school that's a popular school, they're most likely a profile school because they want to make sure that the families that are getting their aid are really, truly, indeed qualified for it. So they can go to places that FAFSA doesn't go to. It could look at non-custodial parent income. It could look at home values, even your primary home. It could also look at all investments that you have, including retirements. There are questions, do other relatives hold money for your kids? They leave no stone unturned. There'll even be supplemental questions, like one will say, what kind of car you drive, what year is it? Because they want to see if you want to brag. I have families over the years, I worked at one of these schools, and families will literally brag, like, oh yeah, I drive a brand new 2020, Mercedes, G-Wagon. Oh, okay, it's a $250,000 car, and you bought it right before you're asking for financial aid. So at me, at my old school, I had broad authority. I would say, sell the car, pay for your kid's college. Just as simple as that. So you want to make sure that you are careful when you do these forms, not to feel all excited to let the lower paid folks at the college know how much money you make. So tread carefully. But with that being said, it is a great form for working families. I have a lot of families that are worried, okay, we work, we earn a good salary, we don't have any businesses or Schedule K-1s or S corporations or LLCs. We just earn a good wage. Two working parents who combine it together, put you in the middle class, and you file FAFSA, and FAFSA is like you could pay a ridiculous amount for college. Profile actually looks at your expenses and your cost of living. So they could look at mortgage payments, debts that you might have, other expenses. You have all of these itemizations you could do for special circumstance, like medical expenses, out-of-pocket, if you have special needs children that you're paying out-of-pocket expenses for. And it could really make a working family look a lot better to the school than FAFSA, who says you can pay $40,000. So it could be a beneficial form for some families if you feel like you're not getting a fair evaluation from FAFSA. Look at a couple of these schools that require profile. So who does it, who doesn't? You're just going to be looking at their website. So who requires it, who doesn't require it? Check the college's website. Look at the forms, look at the deadlines. When do you have to do it? They always have FAQ sections. You could look at a school's packaging philosophy. Sometimes they give you like a mission statement. We help families of this certain amount. Some schools make guarantees. They meet the full need of the student. Some colleges may be need sensitive or need aware, meaning that they may penalize you for applying for financial aid through the admissions process. If you need a lot of money, they'll deny your kid. Or they may be need blind, where your request for financial aid doesn't impact the admissions of the student. These are all questions and things that you should be looking at carefully when you're applying to these colleges.
Can I just get
Sure.
clarification on that? So your student, if you have a good student,
Mm-hmm.
and their financial need
It's
is
high.
high,
Yep.
a school, there's nothing that prevents the school from saying, we don't want to have a student.
Call Colgate. Tell them that your kid is the valedictorian of the school. Tell them that you're on public assistance. See what they say. Yeah. They'll say, probably not a good idea to apply here. They're a need-sensitive school because they're going to say, we don't give full scholarships. So we don't want to accept your top student and then give them, $25,000 off of our $60,000, $70,000 annual costs and then have you somehow come up with the difference. We know you're not. So we're just not going to admit you. We're just going to deny you up front. So, and that's how they do it. That's what we call need-sensitive schools. There are many schools, there are articles about this in Times. Just Google like need-sensitive, need-aware colleges. You'll see articles about schools that outwardly say they do this. And you should talk to some of the admissions offices at some of the schools. It's not a thing that they put in blinking lights on their website. They don't say, oh, apply to Colgate, we're need-sensitive, we may deny you. It's something that you would get in discussion with them. you would just simply talk to admissions, like if we apply for aid, could it have any bearing on the ability to get into the school? And they'll say, yes, we could potentially look at, and it could have some way in and factor in. Sometimes it doesn't happen in the regular admissions pool, it happens in the wait list. The wait list is where things get a little dirty with schools. Waitlist colleges, if your kid's on the wait list, they go to the financial aid form and they'll say, how much money does this family make? If they make more money, they're more admissible to us because we can admit them, we know we waitlisted them, so they really want to come here. And we can give them barely anything, and we know they have a little bit more money, so we can admit them off the wait list, not give them much aid, and they'll be happy to pay more because we happen to bring them in off the wait list. So it happens in both the regular pool, the early admissions pool, it happens in the wait list too. So yeah, different schools can go to it at different times. So yeah, you would want to find that out. Schools will put on their website if they're need blind. They'll put it in their philosophy, we're need blind, it doesn't matter if you apply for aid, we don't factor that in. They're quick to say that, but need sensitive, need aware, whatever they want to use, be careful of that. Net price calculators. You have a lot of anxiety about how much college is going to cost you, so why not just get a quote? You don't have to wait until spring when your kid gets their admissions letter to find out how much a college may cost you. You can just go to their website, pull up their financial aid calculator or net price calculator, punch in your income, your assets, whatever else they ask, your kids' grades, and they'll give you estimates. These are what students like yours gotten from us over the years. And that gives you an idea whether or not the school is worth pursuing or not. Some schools do a better job at these than others. Like you can see Cornell in the top right. They have package examples you can download to see what their aid looks like. They do a very thorough job. Other schools, it's more vanilla, very generic. Give you some basic info, but not the high level of detail that a school like Cornell may give you. But it is in your toolkit. When I was applying to college, I was under the hope and pray system. Hope they admit me, I pray they give me money. Nowadays, at least for cost, I could pull up any college, just put in my income and see whether I could afford to send my kid there. So it's something that you definitely want to use as part of your research. You also want to make sure that you take a look at private scholarships, which is going to be our last area of discussion. The private scholarship world is basically privately funded money from companies, wealthy people, scholarship foundations, charities, where they're trying to give away money to help families pay for college. To qualify, it's everything under the sun. Yes, some scholarships look at your finances, some look at achievement, others look at contests like Enter, and Google does a doodle for Google. Draw the Google logo. If they like it, they give your kid $30,000 for college. They feature them on their website. Google does that as a K-12 scholarship competition. So one of the points here is that it's never too early to start applying for scholarships. Because I know I'm a parent of a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old, and my 8-year-old has doodled for Google the last couple of years, and she will be for the next 10 to 12 years. Even if I'm like, yo, kids, you're not going to eat dinner if you don't draw this damn Google logo, so, let's get it done this year. Usually comes out in the winter. It's something that you could look into. There are other things as well. There's a lot of obscure scholarships out there from small companies. I always tell people, use these websites like FastWeb. You can make a profile for the student. You can say their family background, what their hobbies are, their interest is, religion, all these different kind of things they'll ask about, and they'll try to match the students to scholarship opportunities. They'll email you with new listings that match your student's profile. The more detail you put in the profile, the better the offerings you'll get. But also make sure that you look locally. There could be some neighborhood-based, town-based, community-based programs within the school district. There could also be employer-based and union-based opportunities. So, I live and work out of New York City primarily, and I have, folks that are NYPD, FDNY, sanitation, and I'm always like, look at your unions, teachers, look at your unions, see what you can get. Because those who work in the trades, the unions in the trades, there's all these different kind of opportunities that you may be able to qualify for. And locally, you might have like an Elks Club or a Chamber of Commerce or something like that that gives out small scholarships. And don't be discouraged by amounts. I have some families, some students that literally say to me, oh, I didn't apply. I'm like, why? Because it was only $500. Only $500. That's free money. If I put $500 at the top of the table and said, first one who executes a clean backflip will get the $500. I'm sure some of you would try it and get hurt, but some of you, might make it. So it is something that maybe, that adds up after a while, and it's free money, and it's money that you save if you end up getting some of these scholarships. So definitely take a look at some of these. There are other search engines as well. These are ones that we recommend, but there are many others, Zinch, CapEx, Scholly. So your kids might be on some of these, and it's never too early to start. But make sure that you look right away because it does get late. If you start looking in the spring, you might not see as many programs the closer you get to high school graduation. So contact information is important. This is my agency's contact information if you have any questions about state financial aid or the Excelsior Scholarship or something that we do. You should also make sure that you have the number for FAFSA, which is, if you picked up that booklet in the beginning, I don't know, there was a limited number, but it says you can pay for college on the back of that. There's the number for the FAFSA people, the 1-800-4-FED-AID. The FAFSA people have their number like the old Prince songs. So, it has the number 4 and then it says FED-AID. So that's the number for the FAFSA people. Your colleges, you should make sure you have on your phone notes with your cheat sheet with the financial aid office numbers at the colleges that your sons and daughters are applying to, because you may want to work with them. With financial aid offices, you may be working with them at different points. You may be working with them now with your questions. You might have specific questions about a specific situation with your family, an income situation or an asset thing that's best answered by your college, because you can ask me, I'll give you some general guidance, but ultimately that college is reviewing your form and has to clear it. So you would want to get a couple different opinions. You'd want to call one school, call another school, and get an idea. The second point of contact with financial aid is when you get your offer. You may want them to take a second look. You may want them to do a comparison. Some colleges compete with other colleges, and they may match or better a financial aid offer that you're getting from one of their competing schools. So there's different kind of ways that you can work this at the beginning of the process to make sure you're filing right, and then at the end of the process to make sure you're getting the best possible offer from the schools. So you want to have that point of contact, that financial aid at those colleges, so that way you know who to call and who to work with, who to email. Typically by May 1st, you have to decide where the kid's going to college next year, so you should make sure you have as final of a financial aid offer as possible before you make that decision to enroll at one school versus another. So let's open up for questions. Yes?
Does the financial aid check go to the school that you say your child's going to?
Most financial aid pays directly to the college. College takes it and they apply it to their direct expenses. So the bill, the tuition, the fees, the housing if they're living on campus. If a student is living off campus and you're paying for housing, like with you're paying somebody, you're renting an apartment in town, students would then, they might give the students some of their financial aid. We call it a refund, where if their tuition is paid for, their fees are paid for, and they're getting some money for housing, they may direct that to the student to then use to pay their rent to their landlord or whatever it is. But generally speaking, everything pays directly to the college, and then the college funnels that out where it needs to go. Yeah. Yes?
The FAFSA, is that only in the US?
Yeah, so FAFSA does not apply to schools abroad typically. So if you're looking at McGill in Canada, that's not a FAFSA school, right? But yeah, US schools, if they want to go to Hawaii, it does apply for even some of the US territories, like if they're going to college in PR, Puerto Rico, that might apply there, but it's typically for US schools.
And what if they're studying abroad?
So yeah, study abroad is fine as long as it's done through their college, where the college is the point of billing, and they could usually use their same financial aid because all the college does is convert their regular bill into a study abroad bill, depending on where they go. I always tell families, kids want to study abroad always like in Europe, and it might cost more. Like if they're going to SUNY Albany, now they want to study at some university in Rome, you may be paying more than what you would typically pay for a semester. I say send the kids to South America or Asia where it's cheaper, and then you might save some money for a semester while they're abroad where they have lower costs. So just keep that in mind when your kids are picking their program. Yeah?
And with the FAFSA, as far as citizenship, it's only the child's citizenship?
Correct. So FAFSA only looks at the question for citizenship is only directed at the student. And if they're a citizen or permanent resident, which they call an eligible non-citizen, they're qualified. The FAFSA does not have any questions for parents regarding citizenship. Neither does it require a parent to have a social. If a parent doesn't have a social, they can enter zeros and they can skip the question. Same thing in New York. We don't look at citizenship status either way, but for parents, we accept tax IDs. They don't have to have a social, so it's very flexible. For parents, we're mostly concerned about money. We want to know how much you make, can you afford to pay for college? That's what we're really primarily collecting. Students have to bear the burden of being eligible for citizenship and stuff like that. Yeah?
How does FAFSA handle LLCs?
So, depends, like is this LLC a business that's truly producing goods and services, that's owned primarily by the family, has less than 100 or less full-time employees, then we don't report it on FAFSA as a business, we just report whatever we made from the LLC, which will be in our taxes. It'll be on our Schedule E, it'll be as part of our Schedule 1 income, which carries over on line 6 to our taxes, it'll be in your AGI. If the LLC is a bunch of real estate investment property that doesn't produce goods and services, which we commonly see, that's real estate in just a different kind of holding. So like if I have a bed and breakfast that have staff and they clean, rooms and cook food, that's different than if I just have 3 rental properties, I have them in an LLC and I just collect rent from them. That would be considered rental property even though it's structured in an LLC. So it depends what the LLC is for. Yeah.
I know you said schools may call you if they see anything, if they have any questions.
Yep.
Will FAFSA ever call?
Typically not, they'll usually give you that report, that student aid report, and there'll be all these messages on there like, this got screwed up, you need to address it. Sometimes you'll get an email from them saying that you need to look back at FAFSA because there was an issue. Same thing with New York, we email you. Our emails in New York are not specific because we don't know who's reading them. So our email will say, there's an issue on your application, click here to log in to see what it is. Very vanilla.
That's my concern. Because
Yeah.
I get those phone calls where, they say, I get student loans all the time, I've never had a student loan. And
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah, we don't do that. And like I said, if you doubt the call you're getting, like they're like, oh, I'm from Columbia and I'm asking some questions about your taxes, and you don't feel comfortable giving that over the phone, I don't know who you are, just say, look, I'm going to hang up, I have your number for the office here, I'm going to call you, I'll call you at the office, and I'm not going to give you a call with the number you're going to give me, I'm going to call your general number to make sure I'm getting your office, and then they can transfer me to you if you're really who you say you are. You have the right to be skeptical. I do it all the time. I annoy people with it. Because you have to protect your information nowadays. Yeah, it's very, very important. But generally speaking, like colleges nowadays, it's so high tech where if there's an issue, they typically will email you or the student and they have you go onto their system and they'll say, log into the Columbia system that we have where you have your admissions, you have your financial aid, all of the info's there, and you can see the messages that you're missing this, and there are links to download the forms and send them back, everything. They like to do everything electronically. So then you know you're giving it to Columbia, you're not giving it to someone over the phone. But yes, be skeptical, protect your info. Any other questions? If not, then I thank you all very much for coming out this evening. Good luck with the college process, get home safe, and good luck.